morning.
It is wonderful to be with you today. I'm happy that my wife Karen, as well as Ken and Mrs. Peachy, have been able to join me as they customarily do. If memory serves, I have not been at St. John's Church since I returned to the diocese. However, in years past, when I was your near neighbor at Christ Church in Bronxville and Trady Hill was your rector, and later when I was the archdeacon of this part of the diocese, I was here many times. Just as a matter of curiosity, who among you was here when Trady Hill was here as your rector? No. Why can I say? It is a great joy to have this opportunity to worship with you. I hope that following the service we can have a further chance to explore more informally some of the broad issues that are facing the life of the church. But in this particular moment, I want to take this occasion to publicly congratulate Father Hesse on the completion of his doctorate, which I understood was this past summer, but I gather was May a year ago. So congratulations to him on that. And for his numerous books, that I gather there's a new one that's just appearing today. Well done. And to congratulate him on the clearly the splendid work that is here today. For those of you who, since you were here in Trady, I can tell you that in those days there would be perhaps a couple dozen people in church at most. So the fruits of your labor and your labor is abundant, and I congratulate you on all. And I want to thank you, the people of St. John's, for all the good that you do for God's people in this place. And I particularly want to commend you for what I understand to be the quite extraordinary education programs that you have. For years, I have preached that the core of a healthy parish's life is marked by attention to three things: worship, nurture, and mission. Mission that is both far and near. These three are the key to a vital parish life. And this is true whether you're talking about a little tiny congregation or a great big one. But at the same time, these three are just as distinct, one of each, as those congregations are distinct from each other. But in whatever way they express themselves, those three need to be there in every congregation's life, or ultimately that parish will wither and die. And so it's clear that the work that you are doing here is bearing fruit. So I congratulate you on that, and I congratulate you on all that you do, and I trust that you know what a treasure you have in your priesthood leadership. It's in the light of all that I am delighted to bring you greetings from the more than 200 congregations of this diocese and say to you, well done. Well done. I want to congratulate those that are being confirmed and received today. I want to welcome friends and family that may have joined them for this wonderful moment in their journey with Christ. In this morning's gospel reading from St. Mark brings us near the culmination of what has been a very long journey. A journey that began at Caesarea Philippi in the northernmost part of Jesus' wanderings. It began with Peter's confession that Jesus was the Christ of God. And it's a journey that ends in Jerusalem, the beloved city, with that same Christ hanging on a cross outside the city gates. The particular story we heard read this morning, the restoration of the sight of a blind man, fits neatly into this whole series of healings and teachings that mark Jesus' journey from Caesarea Philippi. This long trek provided the setting for his school, as almost for his disciples, on his vision of the kingdom of God. The very first teaching in this series, the one about divorce and remarriage, came as a response, you recall, to a challenge presented by the Pharisees. They tried to entrap Jesus with a sincere-sounding question. In essence, what did he think about divorce? Jesus' response challenged them with a whole new vision of God's claim. God, he said, created men and women as equals, each sharing in the dignity of the other, neither to be dismissed on a whim. Then in private, he responded to his disciples' further questions about what he had said. But then, as though to demonstrate that even those closest to you can miss the point, Jesus' next challenge came from those very same disciples. They, it seemed, were preventing little children from coming to him to receive his blessing, which would have been a thing to be done with holy men of that time. Once again, Jesus used that moment to teach his followers about the nature of the kingdom. The dominion of God, he said, was to be received in vulnerability and innocence, not out of the sense of power to be seized or authority to be grasped, but rather as a gift to be joyfully accepted. Next came the request of that nameless rich man, young man, a man who failed to accept the invitation that Jesus offered to him to join the disciples. And again, Jesus used this as a further illustration of the kingdom. The power of the kingdom, he said, is not to be found in wealth or in the advantages that go with wealth. Last week, we heard the story of James and John's really quite remarkable request for a place of prominence when Jesus began his reign. Yet once again, here was another opportunity to teach that the kingdom of God is radically different from the kingdom of this world. Those who reign in the kingdom of God begin by serving and not being served, Jesus said. The dominion of God reverses all our carefully contrived categories of rank and privilege. Today's reading fits this pattern of instruction, and it builds on it in some quite interesting ways. Perhaps the first thing to notice is that the man who is at the pivot point of this story is given a name, and that is distinctive. No other stranger in this whole series of stories is ever named. They're never identified. Now, it's quite logical and quite possible that the correct reason that this was the case is simply because they knew his name, because he apparently became a member of the early Christian community. You remember how the story ends, is that he picks up and then he follows Jesus. So perhaps they simply knew who he was because he was one of the early Christian community. But there's another possibility that shouldn't be dismissed entirely, and that is that it could be that he was given the name as the primary sort of actor of the drama. He was given a particular name to make a particular point. And arguing in favor of this idea is the fact that one possible translation for the name Bartimaeus is son of the unclean. This in turn would underline Jesus' message that the dominion of God is open to all, even those, perhaps even especially those, to whom it had been denied by the law as interpreted by the temple authorities. Now, another interesting element in this story is that the man is himself asked to regain his sight. Teacher, he said, teacher, let me see again. In other words, this is not a healing like that of the unnamed man who had been blind since birth. Bartimaeus was a man who had once seen and lost his sight and asked to regain it, to have it restored. It seems to me entirely likely that this was a particularly popular story in the life of the early church, told in order to encourage those who had fallen away from the community of faith and wished to be restored to that community. And in terms of the healing itself, I think it is important to notice the sparseness, the spareness, the economy of Jesus' actions. He said no word of healing. He offered no prayers. Instead, he did three quite simple things. He gave Bartimaeus a chance to speak. He listened to what Bartimaeus had said. And then he observed that it was Bartimaeus' own faith that healed him. Another element in this rather complex story is the ambiguous role of the crowd. The crowd, it seems, both obstructed and enabled this restoration of sight. At first, they tried to hush him up. They tried to make Bartimaeus stay quiet. He was making a scene with all his shouting. And this was clearly no way to welcome this revered rabbi on his long journey toward Jerusalem. A journey that, no doubt for many in the crowd, assumed would end with a dramatic ushering in of the new age as he took his seat, in the proper seat in the temple. But they, much as they tried, they couldn't make Bartimaeus shut up. He just kept yelling. And then Jesus called Bartimaeus to him. Or at least that is the way we usually hear that moment in the story. But that's not what happened. The fact is, Jesus did not address Bartimaeus. He addressed the crowd. Jesus said, as our reading describes, Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." He addressed the crowd, not Bartimaeus. Jesus used the crowd to achieve his ends. He directed the very crowd that was trying to silence Bartimaeus to be the means by which he was brought forward. And as soon as the crowd heard this, they became Bartimaeus' biggest supporters. "Take heart, he's calling you. Get up." Jesus used the crowd, a somewhat, apparently, overly conscientious, misguided crowd, to accomplish his goal, to bring to healing the man whose sight was to be restored. Now, much in this message reinforces the lessons drawn from the earlier stories. We learn again that God listens. Therefore, in prayer, be bold. Ask for what you want, though you need to be prepared you may not get what you want. The story reinforces the message that the dominion of God reverses many of the assumptions and categories that dominate the world as we experience in our daily lives. Because in the reign of God, prominence goes to those who serve and sacrifice for others. But to this list, today's story adds two things. The first is the hope and the promise that restoration is possible, even for those who have lost their way. And second, God uses the community itself, flawed though it is, to bring about the divine will. Unlikely as it may seem, God uses the fickle and fallible community to reach out and call us to himself. It is into this upside-down kingdom of God, peopled by very imperfect yet eternally hope-filled citizens, that those being confirmed and received today are committing and recommitting themselves. Let us join them in that commitment, that they may share in that dominion of God, today, tomorrow, and unto the ages of ages.